Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with veteran Bay Area jazz drummer, composer, and educator Scott Amendola. We caught up with this veteran drummer to talk about current projects like his 2024 CD Hive Mind, done with Devine and Garrison, along with the great ride in the world of music. Originally from New Jersey, he has spent a career gracing stages with the likes of Charlie Hunter and the great Pat Metheny. It all began at the Berkelee College of Music and took off when he moved to California. Dig this story.
Thanks for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love getting new cats on the show, and you got quite a storied history in the world of music. Before we get into your latest release, the COVID pandemic, if we look back 4 years ago, really ravaged and went through the musicians in a very destructive way with touring and everything. Ultimately, how did you make it through that time period, and how did it change the way that you do things now?
Well, I have to say that at the beginning of the pandemic, when it all started, there was a lot of, obviously, worry, concern. I had to cancel work like everybody, and we had to sort of change our way of thinking. And my wife was actually quite concerned. Of course, because what we do when you're a touring musician and you're working and you play in front of people. But I've been touring since a late teen at college, and kind of like there were periods of my life when I was gone a lot, and it's been great, and it's been an amazing career. And frankly, to be home and to not have to deal with all the noise of the music business for a little while was actually kind of good for me. And fortunately, we were able to sustain ourselves thanks to my wife's job through that time. So, of course, I wish it was under different circumstances, and I wish that we as musicians could have self-imposed sabbaticals so we can kind of get our heads clearer. So I was able to work doing a lot of remote recording in different projects, including film scoring and just making tracks for people of all kinds. Some paid work, some not paid work, some really creative stuff, some more like session work stuff, which is all really fun. But for me to have that time was pretty interesting. I mean, a year into the pandemic, I actually realized that my playing had changed and that I felt comfortable doing things that I hadn't felt really super comfortable with my entire career, life as a musician, and that is playing solo or soloing. Like I've always, I'm an improviser, so that's fine. But I sort of connected with my instrument in a way that sort of I fell in love with it again. And I feel fortunate in that sense to have had that experience, because I know that that's like a kind of a pretty privileged experience through that time to have. So it's one I don't take for granted. But, of course I missed playing with people. I missed that interaction, because the one thing that was really hard for me was, I know a lot of people sort of were able to write music and sort of plan some records and things like that. I tried doing that, and my process in that involves people. So I was working on some music, but I felt really stuck in writing. And so until I was able to actually connect with people and start playing again, which was the birth of this band, Stickler Phonics, that's actually my personal latest record, is the Stickler Phonics record, and that whole concept. And that was born out of these two guys coming over and us just playing, and then once we were able to play gigs, start gigging a little bit, and then feeling comfortable in that sort of odd configuration, and then eventually going in the studio. But yeah, I'd say that I benefited a lot from being home and being close to my family, being around my kids. But of course, I missed so many things that we all missed. I think it was a little bit I don't know. I feel like it was kind of an interesting time. I mean, believe me, I was ready to go out and play once all that started opening up.
So talk to me about Stickler Phonics. Talk to me about this latest album. Kind of Just kind of give me an overview of your feelings on it, and just kind of getting back into music, so to speak. Like, once you got back into recording, how comfortable was that, and how does it feel now?
Oh yeah, so I'd say that to answer that part of the question, like going back and getting into it, like the recording part, the playing part was easy, was great. I felt refreshed, I felt inspired, and Stickler Phonics was I had a quartet before with I was playing with two horns, and when the pandemic happened, the bass player moved, and then once we felt comfortable, the two horn players started coming over, and we started playing just to play, you know what I mean? Just to sort of, we were just improvising, and we were doing it pretty regularly, and then we started bringing in music. Some of my old tunes, they were bringing some things in, and then, like I said, I decided to book a gig, and they were just a little hesitant, like, wait, can we really do this live? And I felt like, look, this is really working musically. So one of the things about me is I've done sort of odd things, you know, and so for me it wasn't that big of a deal. And our roles sort of change when you don't have chords, you don't have a bass player. So I call this band a micro brass band because it sort of reminds me of a micro modern brass band. So it reminds me of those New Orleans brass bands, but only with 3 people, and modern because of the compositional element, and I'm doing some electronic stuff. So, like, it all was really easy in terms of the music part, going in the studio, and, you know, we were playing a lot, so we felt really connected. The part that was hard was the business part and kind of getting back into booking and playing gigs and trying to get people to come out and recognizing that we're still at this place where people weren't feeling safe, you know, going through all that stuff, and then all the expenses of touring and how the business has changed and how selling music is harder. Like, I think creatively, that's not the problem. You know, I think people want to go out and hear music. I think it's really tough. The business part of what we do has shifted so much because we're all talking about streaming and, you know, purchasing music. And there's so many bands touring. It's so competitive just to get gigs at venues. And we're still not seeing, people are going out, but I think we're still not seeing the numbers that we were seeing. And I think people are strapped for money. I think it's just a strange time in the world, what the world is going through. So, I mean, I find it just harder to be a musician this time in sustaining it the way that I was used to before the pandemic. And we've all seen the evolution of the music business and record sales and all that. And, you know, through the way, you know, now people are buying vinyl, but, you know, we used to sell a lot of CDs, and we're not selling those kind of numbers in vinyl because people are just not buying as much. So there's been that adjustment and the reality of how to make it work on the road when flights are way more expensive, housing, whether it's Airbnbs or hotels, gas is more expensive, rental cars, you know, and we got to sort of somehow make some money doing it. So with creative music, it's a struggle, I find, and it's more of a struggle than it was. That's the hard part about this all, you know. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So I'm curious, let's go back to where you were born and raised. How did music, and more specifically jazz, become this focal point for you and become your career?
Well, I grew up with my grandfather was a guitar player in New York City. His name was Tony Gattuso, and he was a session guy. And he was a really amazing guitar player. And so I grew up listening to him at Sunday dinners at my grandparents' house, play guitar for a couple hours when we had these like marathon long, like family dinners. And I just always took to jazz, but what it really is that I'm a natural improviser. So what that means is at an early age, I always felt really comfortable improvising and making stuff up. I mean, at a really early age, it just never really intimidated me that much. So as I you know, was coming up in even late elementary school and early middle school, I started listening to radio stations around New York. I grew up in New Jersey, and listening to everything from a lot of fusion, Weather Report, I listened to a lot of Pat Metheny. I'd go to Pat Metheny concerts all the time. And was checking out magazines and going to, when I was a teenager, going to all kinds of clubs in New York because I could get into clubs, going to hear Mike Stern play at the 55 bar, going to a place called McKell's, and having other musician friends, especially this older bass player who I used to play with. He just would turn me on to records, everything from like Steve Kahn and that sort of fusion thing to Coltrane and all kinds of stuff. So I took to the improvisational aspect of music and drumming really early. In fact, I submitted a solo to the Buddy Rich competition on Modern Drummer magazine, and I got like third place in it. I got some thing in the mail, and my solo, I remember I was really into Jack DeJohnette, and I was just thinking about him a lot. And I remember thinking about that trio with Keith and Gary Peacock, and I just was really drawn to that, to improvising, and it's a big part of what I do, whether I'm playing with a singer or whether I'm free improvising, So it's, and seeing Pat Metheny live was a big thing. I saw the Song X tour, which was Pat Ornette, Charlie Hayden, Jack DeJohnette, and Donato Coleman in, I believe it was 87 in New York. And that show kind of changed me. There was stuff that happened that I didn't understand at the time that had a profound effect on me. And I got to play with Pat, and I got to talk to him about it. And, that listening to Ornette and just exposing myself to all this music and all kinds of music, and then later meeting people like Nels Cline and, meeting Charlie Hunter and just the trajectory of meeting all these great musicians that I connected with, Philip Greenleaf, and doing a lot of free improv. It's just something that I feel to this day. I was just out touring and doing some gigs with David Torn, and we were just improvising at festivals and in New York, and that whole thing is just who I am as a musician, and I just try to interject it in whatever I'm doing. I think it just happens,
So after all these years of being a musician, what do you like the best about it? What's the best part of being a professional musician?
Playing live. There's no question. That's my favorite thing to do. Whenever I get in a room with people, with musicians, and these days I just play with amazing people, and that's it for me. Being on stage and sharing this thing with an audience, just that special connection. That's definitely my favorite thing to do, without question.
So talk to me a little bit about, obviously you saw a lot of shows and stages, but what was the one stage that you finally got to play on where you were just like, wow, I can't believe that I'm here and I'm doing this?
I think there's a memory I have when I was in my mid-20s and I was playing with Charlie Hunter's band, and we were touring, and we were in a van. We were playing his music. We were playing the music we wanted to be playing. We were playing in cool venues. We were playing to packed show audiences, packed, rooms. And I just remember being on this drive and somewhere in the middle of Nevada or Utah. I just remember it was like deserty outside, lying on this bench in this van and just thinking I'm actually doing what I wanted to do. I'm living this dream. And I felt really fortunate I felt really grateful, and I felt like, it was happening, and it both excited me. It sort of made me a little freaked out. How do I, this thing of how do I keep this going? I've never rested on my laurels. I've always felt I've had these great moments of playing shows with great people, and playing with Mike Patton in Chile in a football stadium after we heard and we played before Ennio Morricone playing with a 200-piece orchestra. I'm just pinch me. Is this real? I've had many of those things happen to me in my life. And I feel lucky to have had that. But again, it's I've really worked hard, and I keep working at it because I I just want to keep doing it, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel lucky, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I'm curious, from all of these names that you've mentioned, Pat Metheny and Charlie Hunter, and a lot of people that have been considered legends and luminaries, what did you learn from them that you have in turn tried to teach younger players that you get around now?
I mean, a lot of things. One of the things is be yourself, be a good person, and work hard. And when I've worked with these people, one of the things I realized is I was there because they wanted me, and I always wanted to be the best version of myself. And you can only be the best version of yourself at that moment, but listening and taking instruction and trying to even be better. It's like, put your ego aside and be in the moment and be focused. And they've all these great musicians have really helped get to me, helped me become me. Mike Patton said this thing in an interview I listened to where he said, the easiest thing for me to do is be me. And it is the easiest thing, and allowing yourself to do that is what can be difficult. But what I've been fortunate enough to do is to be around people that's what they want. They want me to be me, and they want to help. Like Nels Cline was such a huge influence and such a big help in pulling things out of me, like the creative things, the electronic musician to me, the stuff that I'm doing with pedals and sampling and stuff, and very encouraging in so many ways. Like, and then working with Pat Metheny, even though it was just a very short time, like, he's definitely the most articulate musician I've ever worked with, and he has very particular things he wants you to do, but they all make so much sense. The things he said to me about just playing and whatever, it just, are things that resonate with me. And Charlie, with his focus on the aspects of music that are important to him and what I bring to that, it's all been powerful. And those relationships continue. I mean, especially with Charlie and Nels, and hopefully, I'll get to play more with Pat. That would be amazing. But if I don't, whatever. Like, it was an incredible experience, and just the plenty of the other musicians, just the encouragement, the comfort, and also the excitement. And I think we all inspire each other and push each other. And I don't know. I sort of feel like I've never felt more comfortable behind my instrument, in a sense of ready to play, ready to grow. And, I think the toughest part is, again, being a musician, but trying not to let all that outside stuff. I think that's the hardest thing for us today, is especially for those of us that are older, that experience this sort of golden era of the music business, is to not let the struggles of the music business stop creating and infect the desire to create music and art. You know what I mean? But when I'm around these people that we're talking about, like, they're just forging ahead, and it's, that's what we got to keep doing. So, I mean, I feel like those people have just constantly inspired me in interesting ways, and they keep inspiring me, and hopefully I can pass that along to people,
Well said, yeah, and it is emblematic of the jazz community. There is always that continual push forward. And I'm curious, why do you love jazz?
What it is jazz is a thing that we need to talk about for a minute, because what I like about jazz is, if you look at the early days of jazz and you look at what's called jazz now, there's been an evolution for 100 years, and that's what I like about the music, is how it evolves, and it's continually evolved and how it's changed. And I like that in music. I like music that pushing the boundaries. And again, to me, jazz is about improvising, and that's what excites me. And I think I think it's a tough word in a lot of ways, because, like, a lot of us are, a lot of people are like, well, what is jazz? And you look at the Montreux Jazz Festival and you see like rock bands are playing there, and it's like, well, what does that mean? When those of us that are dealing with jazz, and we think about the early days of jazz and Louis Armstrong, for example, or anything from New Orleans, and then you look to the different eras of it, and it's just change, and it's just the idea of music being open is because there's, in certain ways, certain people wouldn't consider me a jazz musician, and what I say is I'm part jazz, because I love, like, growing up with my grandfather as a guitar player. He played in the 30s. He played starting in the 30s. He played with everybody. He played with, Papa Joe Jones. He played with Milt Hinton. He played with all these heavies in New York. He went to Minton's and sat in, and he had all these great stories. But he had a Fender Stratocaster guitar that we played together. He loved the Beatles. He had a distortion pedal. But, like, whenever we'd play together, I was really into Elvin Jones and Jack DeJohnette when I was a teenager, and he and I would play together. And here's a guy who, when we play songs, they would be really short, and he didn't need a lot of time to say this deep stuff. And he'd be like, oh, you play all that crazy stuff, but I love it. And we talk about different aspects of jazz and the evolution of it. And he liked certain periods, and he didn't like certain periods. But for me, having that foundation of and that experience of working with someone who was there at the beginning was really profound and really affected me a lot, because I love listening to that early music, and I love bringing that in to certain aspects of what I do. I look at someone like Joey Barron as someone who is someone who's done that through his career, and who really is tapped into that, but can play really wild and crazy stuff, as we've heard with all the projects he used to do with Zorn and whatever, So, yeah, I don't know if that sort of answers the jazz. The jazz is a tough thing, because there are people that are very staunch and just like, that's not jazz, this is jazz, and it's like, whatever, I have a very open mind about it, and I think that's what will continue to move it forward. And at the same time, it's all just music to me, so I don't know. I find it to be complex,
Yeah, no, I get it. And, you've seen a lot of shows, you've been on a lot of stages, but I'm curious, if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one jazz show, where are you going to go?
Oh, man, that's a hard question. I'm just going to say in a sidebar, if I could go back and hear one non-jazz show, I would go to the Bitter End and hear Donny Hathaway live. That would be the one non-jazz show I'd go. I would love to be in that room. I don't know if you're a fan of Donny Hathaway, but if I was to go to one jazz show, boy, that is really hard. It might be hearing Thelonious Monk with Frankie Dunlop on drums. Can I do some mites?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because that would be one that I would, because I love, Monk is a really important musician for me, and Frankie Dunlop to me was my favorite drummer that played with him. It might be hearing Papa Joe Jones with Count Basie. It might be hearing Ed Blackwell with Dewey Redman in duo, like in Villasow, it might be hearing Weather Report with Eric Ravat. It might be hearing, Miles with the later, when the quartet like the later version of the tail end of the quartet with Tony and Ron and Wayne and Herbie. It might be hearing the Coltrane Quartet with Elvin doing Love Supreme, or actually if there's like a time when that quartet played Crescent, like, you know, there's so many moments. Like if I could have heard music from, like, say 1950 through 1973, like if I could have been around and old enough to go to concerts then, like that, I think that period of time would have been, I would have just lived in clubs and heard music, you know?
Yeah.
Because then as a kid I got to hear a lot of great music, and I feel really fortunate to have been able to hear Ornette, you know, and to hear Jack. I mean, Jack's still around, but Jack in that setting with Charlie Hayden and Pat and Ornette, like, I feel like that was a seminal sort of band and like a really important time in music. And I'm a really big Joe Zawinul and Weather Report and Wayne Shorter fan, and I got to hear Wayne and Joe separately, but I would love to hear them together. You know, that would have been an amazing thing. You know, and of course after we get off the phone, there's going to be like a zillion things. You know, I mean, one surprising one might be, I don't know if there's this guitar player, Steve Kahn, who made these records with Steve Jordan, Anthony Jackson, and Manola Badrina, and they're real fusion records. Like, but there's this period when they played together, and I like that music, and I like that period. And it was a very short-lived thing, but there's something really magical about how that quartet played, and for me that was, I like that sort of stuff a lot. Like, you know, I like a lot of music. I mean, but, you know, and including African music. I mean, like going to hear like Fela Kuti with Tony Allen, you know, that would have been amazing, you know. That would have happened in that 60s period, late 60s period, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that list. So let me ask you this. Everyone out there has a perception of you, Scott. Family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, man. Who am I? I guess I'm a musician who, I mean, are you talking about just in general or just in music, or just, is it a very broad question? Is it going to be anything?
Well, I mean, I think it's, the Venn diagram goes into itself. I think we leave behind impressions. We leave behind this feeling to people of who they think we are. And it all, like, fluctuates based on who it is.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, what is your perception of what you're putting out into the world?
I think one of the things about me is I'm trying to sort of raise my hands in the air for the team, meaning, like, I feel like I really want to be supportive of my fellow musicians and, like, what we do, and like, keep music kind of going and alive and be part of a community. And I hope that that's the perception of me. It's like someone who is creative, pushes the envelope, is a good guy, and, like, you know, really tries to help this community as much as I can, and sort of keep pushing the music and provide something. Like, I see what we do, and I said this as, like, maybe I didn't, and I'll say this a little clearer, as, like, us musicians, we can play, you know, behind closed doors all the time. But when we get to play in front of people, I feel like that's a real special thing, and that means people have to show up. And this is a collective thing. So when I'm in a room on a stage with people there, I feel like we're all in this together, and I really appreciate that, and I hope that that's what's coming off the stage, and as a person is my appreciation for people that continue to support what I do and just music in general. And I think that I kind of think that's what I'm here to do, is to play music and provide something for people, but with the idea that that I'm getting a lot back, and that it's something that I don't take for granted, and that like I appreciate a lot. You know what I mean? If that does that, I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense.
No. I dig it. It's a big question, and you nailed it. And I'm curious if anyone out there, before we get into where people can pick up your latest projects in the proper format, what about live shows and even your latest projects? Where's the best place to figure all this out?
Oh, definitely my website, scottamendola.com. And what I tell people is to sign up to my email list. And if you can follow me on bands in town, that's great. So I'm on social media. My question always with social media is these algorithms, and if you're going to see my posts. But if you're okay with email and bands in town, which I think is fantastic, you'll find out all that stuff. And you know, I'm easy to follow and all that stuff. So yeah, and I try to keep things up to date, and yeah, you know, say hi, whatever, you know.
Perfect, man. Well, Scott, I'm glad we hooked up. Thank you so much for talking about your world, your fascinating world in jazz, and best of luck with everything, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, hopefully see you in person sometime.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in San Francisco, New Jersey, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Scott for his time, story, and cool. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.